The nature of the natural resources sector means there's far more entities that invest by way of joint ventures or invest into associates than many other sectors. IFRS 9 has introduced the predictive loss model. IFRS 9 was predominantly written for the banking sector. So if you make a loan to anybody, whether it's an individual on a mortgage, whether it's a major loan to another bank, IFRS 9 requires you to predict whether that loan will go bad. IFRS 9 needs you to predict whether that loan has become impaired. When we now apply that to the natural resources sector, a major issue is loans that an investor has made either to its joint venture or to its associate. For various reasons, usually tax structuring, the investment into a JV or into an associate hasn't been made by way of investing in shares, equity, it's been made by loans to that entity. Typically, the reason for this is predominantly around tax. So if a project becomes successful and ultimately all the senior financing has been repaid, you can actually then repay the loan in a tax efficient manner out of jurisdiction, rather than the difficulty of repaying dividends or repaying share investment. So economically, it makes perfect sense to have a loan, but by its nature, by the substance of it, it's much more of an equity investment. People make these loans knowing they may not get repaid back, or if they do get repaid back, it will be in 10 years, 15 years, only if the mine's been successful and if they've repaid the senior financing. The issue here is there are very complex rules that were designed for lending by major banks that now have to be applied by entities in the natural resources sector lending to speculative projects, and some of those speculative projects are even in the exploration phase. The new impairment standard is a predictive impairment standard, and it involves a three-step approach. Three-step approach is what event will happen in the next 12 months that could cause impairment, and then critically, at every reporting date, you have to determine whether there's been a significant deterioration in credit risk. If there has been a significant deterioration in credit risk, you actually move from a stage 1 impairment model to a stage 2. If you're in a stage 2 impairment model, you now have to predict the likelihood of the loan being impaired over the lifetime of the loan. This model, the banks have struggled to actually apply this model, and the banks by their nature only lend to creditworthy sources. When we're looking at this in the natural resources sector, these loans to associates, loans to joint ventures, no bank would lend them money, so this is actually subordinated debt. So now the natural resources companies have to create a model to determine whether there's been a significant deterioration in their credit risk. That will be typically if the commodity price has fallen, if the reserves resources are not showing as was originally expected in the project, whether there's been economic turmoil in that jurisdiction. If that is the case, then you need to create a bad debt expense. You need to start impairing the loan to that associate. This issue, this problem, is particularly a problem for lending money to junior explorers. There are specific rules for having to recognise an impairment charge for exploration expense. Those rules are covered in IFRS 6, and they're very generous. They accept the risk of exploration, and therefore, unless something has gone seriously wrong with the exploration, you don't have to test for impairment. A lot of people previously to IFRS 9 and recent discussions at the Interpretations Committee had viewed a loan to an associate that has been spent on exploration to be covered by IFRS 6, this lenient standard, less need to test for impairment. The Interpretations Committee and IFRS 9 has concluded no, loans to associates are not exploration, even if the money that has been lent has been used for exploration. Therefore, they're covered by IFRS 9. So this will cause those exploration companies far more angst in terms of having to write down a financial asset, being the loan, rather than actually an exploration asset.